Is it going? Mm-hmm. All right. Hey, welcome to Tsunami, folks. Yes, well, there's four of us here today. This is episode 3 of Bookstore Stories. Valerie's behind the camera pointing out, reminding me that this is number 3. And today's a very special one. We have a local poet who's going to practice enunciating with a mask a moment. Frank Rossini. You might know Frank. Frank, how long have you been in Eugene here?
Oh, about, let's see, I came in 72, so 28 and about 42 years, something like that.
42
40,
years?
Somewhere.
Wow. What did you do when you were, are you retired? Are you still working?
No, I'm retired.
Fully retired?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a teacher for, I was a teacher for 42 years. I taught in New York, and then I taught here when I came out here.
You sound like you're from New York.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never lose it.
Never lose it.
No.
I have a question. We're going to talk about this book in just a moment, and then we're going to give it to Frank. But let's see, a couple things we want to mention. The book is for sale at the bookstore, also on our website.
All right.
And Frank's partner in life, Lynn Nakamura, correct? Are you two married?
Yep.
Wow, Lynn's in the audience. Lynn's our audience. Lynn, you can call on up here. How long have you been married?
We've been married for 40 years.
Yeah, about 40 years.
40 years. Wow. And yet you have kids?
Yeah. I have 4 kids.
4 kids.
Yeah.
All right.
I had 3 children, and then we have a child between us.
Wow. Are they all still living at home?
They're all over the place. One's in Germany, one's in Connecticut, one's in New York, and one's in where is it? The trees. Joshua Trees.
Oh,
California.
Wow. Huh. And I have to ask a question directly related to this book.
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever, when you were young, did you ever get to see Jackie Robinson and Sandy Koufax live in the stadium together?
You want to hear the story on that?
If you got a minute.
Okay.
But enunciate. Practice enunciating,
Okay.
because there's a lot of people want to hear this.
When I was a kid, my father was a big baseball fan. In fact, he played semi-pro baseball, and the major leagues kind of looked at him for, But he saw Babe Ruth, and because my father was born in 1909. And so when I grew up, he of course decided, he figured I was going to be a Yankee fan as well. Except I always did it, I don't know whether it was a subconscious or whatever, but I always sort of said, no, like in this case, I'm a Dodger fan. I loved the Dodgers, but he would not take me to Ebbets Field. He loved to go to the baseball games.
Dad.
He would take me to Yankee Stadium, but never Ebbets Field, because he hated the Dodgers.
Oh, yes, of course.
Right. So I never got a chance to see them in person. I never got the chance to go to Ebbets Field. But I did go, many times to Yankee Stadium.
You saw the Mick.
Yeah.
The Wild Man.
Yeah.
Okay, kind of the polar opposite, the juxtaposition of the Robinson Koufax crowd. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, folks. Frank, you've been up on this stage a number of times as a poet.
Sure.
It's been wonderful. I got to tell you, people, this book, I have needed poetry through the pandemic, and I have avoided it. And Frank came in a couple of weeks ago. He just finished his book, published by a local publisher, Roger Moody. We all know Roger in the poetry crowd. So I delved into it the last few days, and I love it. A beautiful work. Last confession. About 100 pages. Every poem was worth reading twice, which is rare in my life. Joy Harjo on the back also speaks very highly of it, as does Maxine Skates. And we're going to get a sampling of some of these poems. It's also going to be a first here at Tsunami in the pandemic. This is the first time we're going to have a human being during store hours without a mask. I'm going to step away, and that's going to give Frank the full opportunity to share his poetry.
All right. Well, thank you. All right.
You can take it off.
I take this off.
Wow!
I can breathe. Just a couple of words about the book. The book is autobiographical. Along the way, I just gathered these poems together, and then I saw there was sort of that kind of structure that I thought was going to fit pretty well with the collection of poems. So I'm going to read just a couple of poems, and the first one, because autobiography requires a lot of memory. And some of the memories are things that are really ingrained. Some I had to kind of go back. Some I probably made up. But I want to just kind of read these poems, and I try to pick a couple of poems from different sections of the book. So the first poem I wanted to read is called Memory. The juncos came back today, one in the red maple hops branch to branch, while my daughters watched the high, thin laughter of old cartoons. At work, the swallows have returned, rattling air with rapid beeps and dives. This is one kind of memory. Like the map, the great blue swims each year, or the paths moon flies from night to morning. This is the big memory that drowns the dinosaurs in the dust of a pre-nuclear winter. My father remembers not buying me a new bike after a childhood accident. I remember my newspaper manager's ink-bruised face close to mine, the stink of his stale cigar, and a whale spilling from the ambulance like blood. And bent over a shot and beer, the driver who hit me, a retired cop, forgets but wants to know the score flickering above the bar as the bartender wipes dust from a row of unopened bottles. The jukebox skips a beat so skillfully no one notices anything is missing. This is another kind of memory, what we create as the air eats our lungs, food for dreams, images for the soul to rise and snap like insects from the passing waters. My mother sits in the common room with a basket of family pictures in her lap, a nest of exiled memories, her mind a broken shell. We hand her our newest born, and her flesh remembers how to rock to ease a child. Her cry chants through my mother's nodding head, like a prayer that's lost its words, a wind that moves nothing. The next poem I'm going to read, again, deals with memory, and it comes sort of from two sources, one from my direct experience, and one from when our youngest daughter was in middle school. They had to do a project on family, and I asked my father to write her some letters talking about his growing up in New York City. He was born in 1909, and his grandmother, his mother, my daughter's great-grandmother, came to the United States in about 1885. She and her mother came. Her husband had died, and I never heard much. I knew her, but I never knew much about her history. And my father wrote this letter lot of stories and things about relationships that I had no idea had existed with my grandmother. And so I took my own experience with my grandmother and then some information from this letter and the source of this poem called This American Life from my grandmother. In spring, my grandmother sewed dresses, 3 for my sisters, 3 for my cousins, a skill she learned a young girl emerging from steerage into New York's sweating garment shops at the end of a grinding century. Pins in mouth, she draped the girls in organdy, taffeta, chiffon, and crinoline, marked and cut the cloth, and for weeks worked her needle by hand and treadle. Easter morning, my sisters, like little pastel blue and yellow bubbles, bobbed down the hall to the floor-length mirror on the bathroom door, twisting their necks to see what others would see walking behind them. One spring, my grandmother took me, the only boy, to buy my Easter clothes. She wore her flowered dress and sturdy shoes, the same way she dressed 30 years before in a photograph. My grandmother, her 3 sons, and her mother on a picnic by the bay in the Bronx at the end of the streetcar line. I wore my good shoes, good pants, good jacket. We rode the elevator through Queens, the conductor announcing each stop in an indecipherable mumble, the train squealing around curves, descending beneath the East River to Grand Central, then a double-deck bus to Macy's where we ate hot dogs, sauerkraut, a piece of apple pie. I was surprised. This year I wouldn't be a little man in a little gray suit with a little fedora. She let me pick a chocolate sports coat, flecks of red woven into the fabric, blue-gray pants, brown loafers, and a skinny maroon tie, a harbinger of my teenage quest for cool. I didn't know my grandmother was a fatherless girl who sailed from poverty to poverty and had 3 husbands. The first disappeared after a daughter's stillborn birth. The second, my grandfather, one of 11 children, his father an immigrant stonecutter who carved a life out of New York's produce markets and moved his family uptown. Maybe this son was her safe port. They divorced because he lost his job, or he drank, or joined a union. Or maybe her mother's constant whispers, "You can do better," cast her adrift. She ran a boarding house, cooked, cleaned, laundered, at night did piecework with her needles, at times fled one place for another when the rent came due. The third, an older Jewish man from the neighborhood, had a steady business, a wife and 5 children he left for my grandmother and her 3 sons. He smoked cigars, she cooked, they played cards. When she died at 93, my mother sent a photograph. My grandmother in her flowered dress and sturdy shoes, smiling by the African violet I gave her when I left the city for the West. A note to her grandchildren, how she loved her sons, how our parents loved us and we should honor them, how she prayed each night God might forgive her youthful sins, her sins of surviving his gift of this American life. We're going to switch now and talk about kind of a different kind of memory. I'm going to read 2 poems that I wrote after I had moved here to Eugene, and I've been living here over 40 years now. Obviously, it was quite a change for me, and there were things I needed to learn, and what I needed to learn most was learning about the place, because I had never lived in such a place, and my wife and I were fortunate enough to be able to buy a small piece of land, and that's been a great teacher, I think, for both of us. So the first poem is called Spring Fever. In this month of the green apostle, before bee-buzz and pollen, when horny toms, fantails, and gobble-gobble after flirty hens, when the day's promise is the promise of work, the need to hold the wild in hand, to prune, mow, dig, haul, lift, push, pull. On this morning my boots and gloves gather the last heat from night's dying fire. A flicker half-heartedly chases toys from the suet. Squirrels chatter through downpours. The dog groans as she dreams by the door. And like Jesus, the morning after a Good Friday, I lie quietly waiting for the stone to roll from my eyes. And I plan how I'll move a rose, maybe plant an oak in the north field, a maple in the east. How I might dig a small pond, stack a stone wall, build a rain house where my wife and I sip tea around a tight fire and watch in winter storms gather, then flow from the hills, shaking the bamboo, sometimes bowing them to the ground. I plan how I will keep up with this land as it stirs, sprouts, erupts into an unruly throng. Their song setting trees to blossom, their dance luring even a bloody Jesus to rise from death and walk one last time this earth in glorious riot. Hand me my gloves, my fiery boots. I am ready. And the last poem, sort of staying on the same theme, and again moving from New York to Eugene, and finding this piece of land required some changes. It required learning about the land and the lessons that the land had to teach. And so this poem is called Mowing. I know the time for first mowing. I've learned the subtle swale, how different grasses respond to the blades, how low to duck beneath the oak to save my scalp, how to balance my weight to cut side hill, how to brake to descend the steep slope. Every year something new, an unfamiliar grass, a volunteer oak emerging from a blackberry tangle, or what is new are small places my dog is first to find as she grows old, the warm in early spring, the cool in summer. And as I watch the hawks, the crows, the jays, the flicker who comes the last 2 days to feast on ants in the rotting wood bounding the garden beds, my body slows, becomes one more changing constant in this place I call home.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
All right.